I want to add some fluid stains to the model, and one of the places I always like to start is anything that looks like a gas cap, some kind of gas cap, oil filler cap, radiator filler cap, future space fluid, unknown purposes, but still something might leak from it cap. So this looks like a good candidate. This looks like a good candidate. And this looks like a good candidate. Plus, there can be other places that fluid can leak from, like there's some piping over here that I may do some leaks. But I think it just adds to the overall look for a vehicle to have some kind of leaks from it, because that happens in reality. So why not in, the future world of Warhammer, where there's nothing but war and ice cream? So I'm told by somebody. Anyway. Now, one of my favorite colors for doing oil staining is this Citadel. It's an acrylic wash, and they call it a shade, but it's a wash, same thing, and it is acrylic, called Targor Rageshade. I have no idea what a Targor is, or why they get this color when they're raging, but it's kind of a browny purple color. And what I've done here in my palette is I've mixed it with some Lamy medium. And again, when it comes to the names of Citadel stuff, if you're not familiar with them, don't get hung up on what the name is. All this is acrylic medium. That's it. It's just thinner. It's just a medium, like Liquitex or something like that. It's just I've got a bottle of it, so why not use it? I've mixed it roughly 50-50 here in my palette, so that I want to thin it out. And all I do is, at first I go in and I just kind of give it a general application to kind of get the notion going that this thing has some staining. I want to outline it. I want to, just make it stand out a little more. I think that one of the things that I try to remember to do is put things on a model so that if somebody's looking at it, either in photos or maybe in person, or eventually I plan to sell this on eBay, hint, hint. If somebody's looking at it, it gives them some points of interest to look at. I think that's a nice touch to put into a model, is to just focus on a few places where you add some visual interest to reward the viewer, so to speak. Inviting them to look a little further, inviting yourself to look a little further. Maybe you just build it and put it on your shelf, and then years later you go back and you say, hey, I don't remember doing that. That looks pretty cool, So let me let that dry, and then I'll show you what I do next. Now, I got that mostly dry with a hair dryer. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to go in. I'm just going to kind of spot in some staining around it. Now, one of the things that people say that they don't like about acrylic shades, acrylic washes, is the tea staining effect. But I think in this case, this actually works to my advantage. So I'm going to put that in like that. I'm going to put a few more over here like this. And I'll just get some here. I can hardly see it, but that's okay. I know what the process results in, so I'm okay with it. I'm just going to put some in like that. Let's make this one really, really big. I don't know why I said let's, because you're just watching or yawning or clicking away, but anyway, just going to put that in there like that. This is a real leaky one, whatever this is. There. All right, now let me give that a chance to dry. Okay, now that's dry enough. That works. I put a little bit of this mix right here. I put a little bit right over here, and I'm just going to go grab a big blob of my medium. I'm just going to swirl it around like that. Clean my brush off camera. Dry it off on a paper towel. And I'm going to go in, and I'm just going to spot some more in. Now this will leave very subtle coloring, but it will allow the previous color to shine through. It'll darken it just a little bit, but it just spreads the stain out. In other words, my hope is that it will be interpreted as a stain that gets added to over time. And you see it's very, very thin. So it's more like I'm just putting a filter over it. But it just kind of conveys that this is something that has been filled many times, stained many times, and it's gotten dirty many times. You can put on as many layers as you like. I think that'll be enough for this one. I'll see once it dries. Now another thing I like to do is to use other colors. This is another Citadel shade called Mortarian Grime. Again, I don't know what a Mortarian is, but apparently they get grimy. But this is a brown. It's not, doesn't have the purplish tint. It's lighter than the, what was the other one? The Targor Rageshade. But it just has this, again, a browny, oily look. And if you've ever looked at a vehicle that's dirty, older, used, and it has stains from fuel and oil and stuff, you know that dirt and grime cling to it. And it just adds to the look. So by adding some additional color, it changes some places when I put it over it of the previous color. But then I just dot in some in places I haven't touched yet to add additional character. And over here, I'm just gonna load this one up. This one is just gonna be a whole big old mess. And if you're thinking, yeah, but you're not even looking at it, you can't even see it, because I really can't. It's okay. Sometimes I like the serendipity in seeing what happens. So, yeah, this one's just gonna be a big old mess. I know what a big old mess looks like on the side of a military vehicle, because one time when I was a young soldier in a place where people like to take pot shots at us, I was filling up our Humvee one day with diesel, and I pulled up behind the big truck with the nozzle on it, and they said, "Bias, go fill up the Humvee." I had never done that. The only experience I had with filling up vehicles was my own car, so I got out and started filling it up and naively assumed that there would be a cutoff valve, and it turns out there was not. And I sprayed diesel fuel everywhere, got all over the side of the vehicle, got all over me, and made a mess that looked something like this. So you can make your messes as big as you want, because trust me, there's at least one instance in history, at least one, of a stupid young soldier spilling fuel all over his vehicle. And his buddies were so very kind and thoughtful and only laughed for half a day at me. So time I was not real happy about it, but now I look back and that's why I do stuff like this, to kind of remember that. Now I'm going to continue using this Mortarian Grime right around here. I don't know what this hose is supposed to be, but I'm going to make an assumption that whatever it is, it's very leaky fluid. And it's going to make a mess. And so this feature over here, I'm just going to grime it up really good. I'm going to grime it up real pretty. Especially here where it connects, right here, like that, and right here. Now, sometimes I'll get questions because people will see me doing this and they'll say, but I don't want to do that. And my simple answer then is, don't do it. Just because you see some creator on YouTube, whether they're big or small, just because they do something doesn't mean you have to do it. Or maybe you want to do it a different way. You could do this with oils, you could do this with enamels, you could do this with pigments, you could do this with pencils, you could do this with gouaches. You could do this with a lot of different things. You could probably do it with coffee or tea or whatever you wanted, so don't get hung up about it. Now, one of my go-to washes is just a simple black wash, acrylic wash. Now this says Nuln Oil. It's not oil, it's acrylic. This name, Nuln Oil, is from the Warhammer 40k lore, so don't let this trip you up. It's not an oil, it's an acrylic. It's just part of the name. But this is just basically a black shade, but it's very, very useful. And what I'm going to do is I've got this little bit left of this Targor Rageshade with a little bit of the medium. I'm just going to stick this right in there. That's going to pretty much make it black, but I'm going to take advantage of that little bit of medium that was in there, and just cleaning off my spinny tool. And I'm going to use this in a few other places, because on any vehicle there are going to be places that may leak some kind of grease or something if they have to, oil a certain section or anything like that. So for instance, I could see that this might get fairly grimy because they want it to be able to move, so they put some oil on it, like the Tin Man. Oil! Never thought you'd hear a Wizard of Oz reference, huh? But you didn't think you would do that? Not no way, not no how. Oh, there's another one. Look at that. But put that in there. And it just, again, this is that kind of, I'm imagining this being that kind of grease that not only is greasy, but then it collects dirt and grime, and it just gets real chunky looking. I'm going to put some around this. Why? Well, one, to make it stand out, but two, just to give it a bit of a dirty look. Just spot it around on there like that. Maybe a little up here, because in putting these fluid stains, you can help certain features stand out. Those got a little lost in all of the additional effects that I've done. So by putting those on there, it just helps them stand out. A little grease and grime here, like that. And I can go and I can put a few dots over here too. The more colors you add to your stains, the more interesting they look, I believe. So, and then there can be other areas, like along the sides. Maybe this is where they put some grease or something to make the wheels, the tracks, the road wheels work better. Maybe not. maybe it just makes them stand out more. I can put some along there. Just suggest grease, dirt, just a slightly different look, darker than the other elements around it. Now this one back here, because it's a little higher up, and because I've got some space beneath it, I can go in, I can do that initial outline like that, and I can just draw this down like that. See, just a little stain like that. Make it pool down here so that it just suggests something going on. And what it is, I don't know. Do that around this hinge right here. Again, if that's the way the crew gets in and out, they're going to want that to work. So they're probably going to keep it oiled and lubricated and all that stuff. Then it can go anywhere else. What the heck? I don't know why, but there's going to be a stain from right here. Just going down like that. It's right along the top. Why is it there? I don't know. You decide. Sometimes I think it's fun to put elements on a model that invite the viewer to make up their own story. Why is that there? And if the story you make up is that an old man with shaky hands and bad eyesight stuck some Citadel Shades up on it, well, that's the story. Sometimes what I like to do with fluid stains, especially if I'm applying them with some kind of liquid, oil, enamel, acrylic, something that flows, is I like to get some kind of thinner medium. And in this case, because these are water-based, I'm just using water. I'm just going to pre-wet this area right here. I'm literally just painting on water, just flooding that area like that. Let me soak up that down there at the bottom a little bit. And I'm just going to take this Nuln Oil mix that I've been doing. I'm just going to put it on here. I'm just going to touch it on and let it flow like that. See how it's flowing down slowly? That's a real leak right there because it's doing its own thing. It's just going to go down slowly. And I promise this isn't CGI. And if it slows down more than you want, just add another big dot. Now, if this were oils or enamels, you could control it a bit better. You could go back and blend it and do all that. But sometimes with acrylics, I just like to see what they're going to do. There. Now I'll soak this up a little bit. Just let it flow down there like that. Let it dry and leave it. I think stuff like that looks kind of cool. Now another of my favorite go-to colors is one called Agrax Earthshade. And it's just a brown color. And I always, if I can remember, on the top of any vehicle, I always put just a little of this to remind me of the number of times that I would come out of the chow hall when I was in the Army with a cup of coffee in my hand and would get up on top of the vehicle and would be enjoying my morning coffee. And then the order would come to roll out. And I would set my coffee down and put my helmet on my head and make sure that all my equipment was where it needed to be, and then forget about the coffee. And we would roll out, and inevitably my little cup of coffee, it's just a styrofoam cup, it would fall over. If there's any coffee left in it, which there usually was, it would spill. So these right up here are my coffee stains. Now, you can use this Agrax Earthshade for all sorts of stuff. It's a very dirty, grimy look. It's a great product to use, but I always like to put a few coffee stains right up on top. Now, another type of stain that can be on a model and on a real vehicle can be rust. Now, I'm going to use this Skrag Brown. I like this color for rust. In fact, I just write rust on the top of it, so when I look down in the little box that I keep this in, I know which one to go for. But you can use any rust color. I just like this one because it just looks like old rust. And I've thinned it with this Lamian medium. Now, I could have thinned it with water. I could have thinned it with Liquitex. I could have thinned it with a whole bunch of stuff. But sometimes on places where I've already put chipping, I like to put some of this. It's fairly thin, but it just conveys on the larger areas some rust happening. It indicates age. That's what rust generally does. It indicates age. So, in the lore of Warhammer, these vehicles can be, if I'm not mistaken, hundreds of years old, if not more, because they take ones that have been blowed up real pretty, and they pull parts off of them, and they reassemble them, and they combine them with others, and they fix them, and they build new ones. And so these things can be very old. And then you can just put rust. See how I'm doing this? I'm just putting it in different places where logically there may be rust. And with rust, now I deliberately, if you watched the last video, I deliberately did a lot of chipping on this. I wanted there to be a lot of chipping, so that's deliberate. I'm not going to put as much rust, or at least that's my plan. I say that now. We'll see by the end of the video how much I've put. But sometimes it only takes a little bit of rust to indicate, to kind of set the expectation in the brain that this is an old thing. Now, if you really want more control over blending the rust on the intensity of the color, if you're going to use acrylics, add more medium, and that's going to thin it out. It's going to make it much less opaque. And then you just build up layers. If you're going to be using acrylics or oils, then of course you can always blend it and control it that way. I just wanted, not that I'm opposed to using oils, but I just find that for my workflow, acrylics are much easier. That's why I don't airbrush as much anymore. It's a workflow issue. I love using an airbrush. I've done it on hundreds of models. When I did aircraft, that was pretty much everything I did was airbrush. But since I don't have much time to model nowadays, mostly it's a weekend activity, and I only have a very limited window that I can do it on the weekends even. And so because I have very limited time, I choose to paint and I choose to use acrylics because that's a very speedy workflow for me. May not be for you, but that's okay. You pick what works for you. Now, if I want to do some rusting that looks like it's streaking down, I just put it like around that bolt, and then I just bring the color down a little bit. Thinner is better with acrylics because the opacity is lower and you get a chance to build it up. When this dries, the opacity is going to go down just a little. You see how that's already drying, how that looks. And also when you put it on, if you're using matte paint or something that's close to matte, which these Citadel paints are, not perfectly, but they play that on TV. Then when you put it on, of course, the liquid, that's going to make it seem glossy. But after you let it dry, it'll matte out and you'll get a better look at how it's going to be. See how this one's changing? So, and that's a thing that comes just with experience. the more you use it, the more you know the difference between how it's going to behave when you apply it versus how it's going to behave once it's dry. And you can account for that appropriately. Another thing I want to do at this point is I want to start putting some earth effects. I'm not going to do the full weathering, but I like to, if you've ever watched Night Shift, he calls it pre-dusting, I think is what he calls it. But just putting down a layer of something that looks dusty, something that looks dirty, along the side of the vehicle, just as kind of the bottommost layer that everything else is going to go on top of, the heavier stuff. So for this, I'm going to use an AK Interactive pencil. I'm going to use this one, light chipping for wood. But you see the color here, there. You see the color? It's just a dusty kind of color. All I do is I wet my brush and I just kind of rub it over the tip of the pencil. I can put a puddle of water down here to draw from and just kind of pick up that pigment. But what I like about this stuff is I can go in, here I'll do it right here on this door so it's easy to see. I can go in and I can just start drawing this in. And if I don't have as much color as I want, I just go back to this. There's a lot of color. That's what I wanted. So I can put it on like that. And it looks quite dusty, quite streaky. I can start streaking stuff like this down. See, like that. And the good thing about these pencils, I don't know what they're made of. Magic pencil color. I don't know. But I can put this on like this. And then as it dries, if I think it's too much, I can go back. I can blend it back a little. Now this is still liquid, so I can still just pick some of that up. But I can end up with a very streaked and dusty effect. It's not quite as configurable as oils or enamels, but it dries really fast. And in testing these against AK Interactive's gouaches, these have a little more permanence. I don't know what the difference is in how they're made, how they're manufactured, but these, they can still be manipulated with water. They just seem, once they get good and dry, while they also, like a gouache, never seem to totally cure, they just have more durability. So you can put stuff over it and it'll generally stay. So like here, if I want this to be dusty, I can imagine this down here being dusty. Why don't you just thin it out and put it along there? Like that. It gives it real good dusty look. And one of the techniques I like using, I do this sometimes with Vallejo washes, is I just take like a liner brush and I just start flicking it up and down like that. Just flick. Just keep putting color on. And because these can be reworked, I can go back and manipulate that. And if you put it on straight like this and you like the way it looks, well, leave it. You don't always have to reconfigure and rework everything. Point that way, Mr. Gunn. And this is a light chipping, or a light wood. What do they call this? Light chipping for wood. They have a dark chipping for wood. And so you know, in the idea of using multiple colors for things. Sometimes doing that, multiple colors, will just give the additional depth of finish. You see, like this area over here that I put it over here, I can go in and I can just blend that more. Blend it back, blend it down, make it disappear. Flow it a little bit more. So it's very configurable, very useful, like this. Now here on that white, it's very stark. Not that dust wouldn't be very stark, but you see like how I'm cleaning that part between those two areas? So it's leaving more of a streaked effect rather than a filter effect. I can just keep working it. Look at how I just pushed that stripe all the way back. This is how, I've heard some people describe these pencils as acrylic oils, and in some ways they are. They must have some kind of gouache basis to them because they act like them. Maybe they just took gouaches and wrapped them in a pencil, I don't know. But anyway, this is one way of getting in some very nice streaks. And it's kind of easy. You can even take it and just draw stuff on. See how I'm drawing that on like that? I'm going to go back and forth a little bit. The more texture you have on the model, the better it works. I can go back and forth like that, get some of that color in. And I can leave it just like that. No problem. Or I can get some water on my brush, go in and just streak those down. Like that. For years, I had these sitting on my desk and forgot that I had them. And one time I watched, I don't remember who it was, but I watched somebody else's video and they used these. And I thought to myself, man, I need to order some of those. And I was looking up the prices and all of that, and then one of my neurons in my brain fired off and said, you big dummy, you've got these. That's one of the drawbacks of having so many model supplies. And after a while, you start to forget what you have. I've got some drawers in here that every now and then I've gotten where I just take a Saturday afternoon to go through and just kind of see what I have so that I'm not missing anything. Because if you're like me, you tend to collect as many products, if not more products, than you actually use. So anyway, you see how this effect looks. And you know, I don't like how heavy it is right there on that that white area. So I'm going to take a Q-tip. There. Fixed. Simple enough. Now, I'm not a salesman for AK Interactive, but I bought these with my own money. That apparently seems to be important to some. But you can get sets of them, like this chipping and aging set, which has the light and dark chipping for wood, gunmetal, chipping color, and red primer. Not sure what that's used for. And one of them Nazi tanks. I don't build them things. And then rust and streaking effects. Here's another set. This one is very useful. I like using this in addition to all the other rust products I have, but this one is very, very useful. And then they've got others. I mean, they've got, I don't want to say hundreds of pencil options, but they have, I think it's safe to say, dozens of pencils. So there's something to keep in mind if you've never used them before. Now, to just continue the streaking, I've switched over to the dark chipping for wood, the pencil, And I'm just going to add some of this down here also, and get some of that going. And you see that this, even though it's wood chipper, works good, because there's going to be I'm going to put a lot of mud over this, so a lot of this is going to disappear. But it just helps with that depth of finish. It just kind of starts setting things up, and I'm just going to go back and forth between the two colors. If they get mixed in a little bit with each other, that's fine. That's how it would be in real life. But you can put it on heavier, you can put it on lighter. Now, if you want a faster method, you would probably want to use something that would let you just get right to putting the dirt and the mud on and not do this first layer. Depends on what you're trying to do with your model, how involved you want to get with it. But I think to really get that depth of finish, adding multiple layers really helps bring it along. And you see, I'm not being super precise in my work. I'm not doing anything difficult. It's one of the things I try to convey with the work I do, that I'm not doing anything difficult. There's some guys that I watch that I look at, like Martin Kovacs uses a lot of simple techniques, but at the same time, he does some very sophisticated stuff, and especially like when he's working with photo etch and, building things and using tools and stuff like that. And I'm an out of the box kind of guy, so some of those things I look at and I'm like, I could probably do them if I had the tools and the patience, but what I like are just these techniques. All I'm doing is taking a wet brush and wiping the end of a pencil and streaking color. That's it. That's all I'm doing. Simple techniques that can be reproduced easily. Now, I've had a few people that have said, well, I tried that, but I couldn't get the fine lines or something. And in some cases, it may be that you just need to use a liner brush like I'm using. And this is not an expensive liner brush. This one it came in a pack of like 100, so it probably cost about 12 cents. But if it gets beat up and doesn't work like I want anymore, well, I just throw it away and grab another one. Got a jar full of them. But I like to focus in on techniques, one, because I'm lazy, but two, I feel it can be very helpful to just say, okay, this doesn't have to be hard, but if you just keep adding layers, and I know I'm getting into the philosophy of it now, that's okay. If you watch my videos at this point, this is when I start rambling more than I normally do. But when you just start adding layers, it can be surprising how good the model can look. And the more your layers are subtle and the less opacity, the better it's going to look. I know one time a guy sent me some photos of, we had gotten to know each other through email and stuff like that, and he said, could I send you some photos? And I'm always hesitant when people send me photos to give critique, because most times if I'm objective, they get mad at me because I tell them things they don't want to hear. So I've gotten to where if somebody sends me photos, I say, look, are you wanting a back pat or are you wanting objective assessment? And about 90% of the time, I never hear back from them, which is okay. But anyway, this guy, he said, you know, what do you think? And he was, you know, concerned because he wasn't getting it. I don't think my work is refined, but he was saying my work is not as refined as yours. And I said, well, number one, by your own admission, you've only been doing this 8-10 weeks. I've been doing it 20 years on hundreds of models. You know, that's not bragging. That's just fact. Reps help. But I told him, I said, you've got the colors. You know, you got a grasp of the colors that you're using. You've even got a grasp of the application technique. I said, what you're not getting in there that I think is a missing ingredient is opacity. Opacity is kind of an underused tool because it takes longer, obviously, if you've got very thin layers of things. I mean, you see how thin these layers are that I'm doing. Then you have to do it a lot more. It takes more patience. But I hope what this is demonstrating is I'm rambling while I work. And you see I'm going back and manipulating all these different areas. I'm lowering the opacity. But as you work with opacity, you get a much more interesting finish, I think. And it's easier to control. Plus, you tell people about opacity, especially if you're making YouTube videos, you sound really smart. Or so I'm told. I hope so, because I'm not really smart. I'm just persistent and stubborn. But you see how I'm doing this? And like I said, this is not the weathering, the earth effects. This is the basis for them. You'll see. Should be the next video when I get to the earth effects. You'll see. I'm going to muddy this thing up and probably hide every bit of this. All right, you can see how this is looking. And this is not taking me a long time. Everything that you've seen on this video, I've done in about an hour. Yeah, I could take more time to do it. And I've still got to do the front, the back, the top, the sides, all the other parts. But these techniques don't have to take a long time, and because I'm using acrylics, the workflow is really fast, and I can get a lot of things done. And all along the way, if you lose I can't even think of the word that I'm using. I hear Lincoln Wright use it a lot. If the details aren't clear enough, you can go back in and add shades around, washes around bolts or something like that, or, brighten up some edges. I tend to wait till the end to do all those kind of final adjustment steps, but you can do them all along the way. And it really produces a more realistic finish because weathering doesn't happen. It's not like you go out and you get dust one time. There's dust, then maintenance cycles, then fluid stains, then dust, then fluid stains, then a big fluid stain, and then lots of dirt, and then it rains, and then it streaks everything down, and then you go out in the mud, and the mud gets on it. And if you're in Garrison, yeah, you come back and you wash it, and you run it through the wash rack, and you clean it up, and you put it back in the motor pool. But if you're out operationally, you focus on keeping the engine running, the tires inflated, the tracks lubricated, the gun's working. But the dust and dirt and the streaks like that on the side, you don't worry about that. So I'm depicting a tank in combat. And because it's Warhammer, it's, there's nothing but war. They probably don't even have a motor pool to go park their vehicles in because they're doing nothing but war and looking for ice cream. But you see how that looks. Very simple stuff. All right, well, I'm going to call this a video. I had actually planned to get a little further along, but I've rambled on for long enough, so I'll spare you much more ramble. But I hope this has shown that, doing some simple, you can see how that looks right there, doing some simple fluid stains. And note, okay, you get right up to that. It's not great, but, you know, I always say, look at your model in whole. It kind of infuriates me if I go to a model show and I see somebody pick it up, especially if they pick it up. Oh boy, I hate that. But even if they're just leaning in, but they want to get like 2 inches away. Well, if you're looking at that and that level of detail, of course you're going to see this. Of course you're going to see that. These are handmade toys. I'm trying to depict things so that when you look at it at a normal distance, like a normal human being would do, that you go, ooh, cool, a dirty tank shooty thing. So that's how I say, you know, if you will never please the 2 inchers, the people who look at it from 2 inches away. You will never please them. You've got to be night shift. You've got to be micronaughty. And even those, I think, there have been a few times that I've looked at really high resolution photos and zoomed in on things, and I see the same kind of stuff. You know? I see the same kind of stuff, that there's only so much you can do at scale to make it look like the real thing would. And if you look at the real thing, quite often, it doesn't look realistic in the I think if modelers looked at the real world the way they look at models, they would go, oh, that's totally not realistic. I saw a picture of a fighter jet this week that was fairly dirty. And I sent it to a friend of mine, and, you know, I'm like, oh, this can't happen. Fighter jets don't get dirty. And the thing was filthy, you know. But people would argue if you did that on the model, oh, that never happens. Anyway, I'm rambling now. This is the end of the video, I promise. Thank you for watching. Thank you for hanging around till the end. Tell you what, we'll have some fun. I'll have some fun. You may not think it's fun. If you're still hanging around at this point, and you may get this reference, you may not. But if you'll just drop a comment down below that says, oh yes, they call him the Streak. Just put that in there and everybody will wonder what you're talking about. Because 90% of the people bail after about 30 seconds. So we can laugh. I can laugh. I don't know whether you'll laugh. Oh yes, they call him the Streak. Google it. If you hadn't heard of it, listen to it. It'll make you laugh, maybe. Anyway, that's the end of the video. Well, you know what I always say. If you're not having fun, you're doing it wrong. And I am definitely having fun on this one. So, happy day to you, friends. Bye-bye.